MSW Media. Thanks to ExpressVPN for supporting our show. ExpressVPN is an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so your ISP can't see the sites you visit. Go to expressvpn.com/cleanup and get an extra 3 months free.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So yeah, now it's cleanup on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be cleanup on aisle 45.
Welcome to episode 173 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. And we are in the middle of a trial for the entire reason this podcast exists. It's Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck. We have a big show today, especially because Allison managed to sneak up to New York and made it into the first day of Michael Cohen's testimony in the Trump election interference criminal trial. So I can't wait to talk to you about that.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating last minute thing. Everything I do is last minute. And so the Mueller, She Wrote podcast started the week I came up with it. The Jack podcast, the week I came up with it. Like everything is last minute for me. That's just kind of how I roll. But I wrote about the whole experience of being there, not necessarily what you and I are going to go over today, which is some of the more important testimony, but just what it was like in the courtroom. Donald Trump's nap time routine. It's fascinating. I wrote that up in my Substack. You can read that at MullerSheWrote.substack.com. It is free to subscribe to that. Today, Pete, you and I are going to cover the testimony of Stormy Daniels from last week, but we're going to start with the Cohen testimony this week because it's more recent. It's more fresh in people's minds. We also have an update on Trump's appeal of the gag order and some quick updates on Rudy, Pete Navarro, and Steve Bannon. But first, we have some new patrons to thank. And it is because of y'all that I was able to make this last minute decision to go to New York and get into the courtroom. It's because of you that I was able to report from in there. So thank you so much to Marilyn Sandler, Sea Salt, Supergiant Robot, Christine Lind, Owen Cooper, Steve Lamoureux, and Nancy. Like Pelosi, he sneered. Exactly, I clapped. Wonderful. So, Pete, let's start with Monday and Michael Cohen, and then we'll circle back to Stormy, and then we'll end the show with Rudy, Bannon, and Navarro. So, as I said, I made it into the courtroom on the good graces of our patrons supporting independent media and because of the help and advice of other members of the press. So a big thank you. I have to take a minute to shout out Hugo Lowell, Anna Bauer, Ben Wittes, Lawrence O'Donnell, Norm Eisen, Adam Klasfeld, Kyle Cheney, Katie Fang, Lisa Rubin, Harry Littman, even Maggie Haberman. They were all supportive. They were happy I was there. They all gave me advice. It was invaluable to me. And all of them made me feel so welcome. I've been covering this case since 2018. And for it to all come together with the help of our patrons and other members of the press was just the best gift. I'm so grateful. So, Pete, I have to start out with the smoking gun document that I got to see.
Or the smocking gun, if
the smocking gun document.
It, right? Yeah.
I got to see it with my own eyes in court the day I happened to be there, right? This is a document corroborating what I've been talking about for nearly 6 years. In fact, I dug up an old tweet from August 23rd, 2018. And I said, quote, "No way. You don't gross up 180,000 to 360 and kick in 60,000. That's either payments for other work or hush money," unquote. And on the day I happened to make it into court, because I happened to be in D.C. last week for a panel at George Mason University, so I was close. And I happened to be on that panel because Andy McCabe agreed to do a special counsel podcast with me, because I happened to start a special counsel podcast in my kitchen in 2017. And because other members of the press helped me and believe in me, and because all of those stars aligned and the patrons who've donated to the show, because of all that, I was able to see this document that included Weisselberg's handwritten notes that showed the calculations. $130,000 times 2, grossed up for taxes, plus $60,000 to make up for a shitty 2016 bonus equals $420,000. Exactly what I tweeted in 2018. And that document proves they violated New York state tax law, which section 1801 and 1802, the avoidance of income tax through grossing up, which is one of the 3 underlying crimes that elevate the falsification of business records from misdemeanors to felonies. It was just so fascinating to be in that courtroom, Pete.
Yeah, I got to believe, and I'll head over and check out your write-up about it. But so you went, walk me through this. So you went, did you have to get in line earlier? What was the whole process of getting in there?
I hired 2 line sitters from Line Dudes in New York. Highly recommend. One of them sat in the general press line for me and got the number 1 spot. One of them sat in the public line for me and got the number 8 spot. I had the public line backup in case I didn't get in on the press line backup, in case they were like, you're too small, we've never heard of you, or I don't like your face, or I don't know. I had no idea. I have very severe imposter syndrome, so I always like to get a public line backup line sitter whenever I go to court. No, I'm kidding. This is the only time I've ever done it, but I just wanted to make sure I had that backup. There was a member of the public, Mr. Powers, who I spoke to at length. He got there at 2:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. He was first in line in the public line. Now, my line sitters got there at 9 p.m. So that was enough to get the first spot in the general press overflow line, but got me the 8th position in the public line, which would not have gotten me into the courthouse. They took only the first 6 people in the public line.
Wow.
Because there was so much press there, card-carrying press with reserved seats to be in the actual courtroom. And the public, members of the public that morning only got to go into the actual courtroom. They didn't get to go into the press overflow room. There's 2 rooms, right? Main courtroom where it's happening. And then just next door, an overflow press room, which, seats about a couple hundred press.
Oh, wow. And so you can sit in the overflow in the press room, you're able to text and use electronic devices. Do people talk much? I mean, is there whispered conversations going on, and how is it a big television screen with speakers, or how do you see what's going on in the actual courtroom?
Yep. There are 3 big television screens and then speakers that are carrying the audio from the equipment and the microphones in the courtroom. And when testimony starts, once the proceedings start, because the video doesn't come on until after the jury is brought in, because they don't want the press to see the jury, which makes sense, right? Because this jury is protected and anonymized. And early on during voir dire, a lot of the journalists were giving a lot of details about the jurors that gave away who they were. One juror actually dropped out because of it, because their phone blew up with all these messages. Hey, it's you, man. So that kind of got shut down. They don't show the jury. But once the audio starts and the video kicks on, everybody's very quiet. All you can hear is typing. And it is a sea of clickety-clack on keyboards. But what's really fascinating is the rise and fall of the veracity with which people are typing based on what's being said. So when Cohen was talking about early on in his testimony, he's talking about, where he went to college and where he worked and stuff at the law firm that he worked at. It was kind of a light clickety-clack. But then when he started talking about how he didn't actually want to be a lawyer, his grandma wanted him to be a lawyer, that got the volume went up on the keyboard, the clicking on the keyboards. And so depending on how interested, you can immediately tell how interested the press is in what's being said by the volume of the typing that's happening in the room. It's fascinating.
Interesting. So you got to actually see, and it's really cool that you got to see that thing. And I do want to talk about Weisselberg a little bit, because he wasn't there in court, right? I think the prosecution wanted to introduce Weisselberg's severance agreement with the Trump org to explain his absence, but the defense objected to that because it's prejudicial. That's prejudicial because it shows that Weisselberg was paid to keep his mouth shut. The prosecution said in response to that, they'd be happy to stipulate that Weisselberg wasn't present because he's in prison for lying, but the defense didn't like that option, shockingly enough.
Right,
either.
right. They're like, we don't want you to introduce that particular document. And the prosecution's like, okay, well, we can just say he's in prison for lying. He's like, no, not like that.
Yeah, and so there was discussion on Monday about bringing him in without the jury present to see if he'd be willing to testify or if he'd take the fifth. And the reason they want his testimony is because Cohen testified that Trump was in the room with him and Weisselberg when Weisselberg wrote the note that you were talking about, grossing up the repayment of the hush money, and that Trump approved it. Now, if you don't have Weisselberg corroborating and it comes down to he said, Cohen's word against Trump's word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had a discussion with a friend of mine about why Weisselberg. Remember how you and I were like, why they didn't just throw the book at Weisselberg? You got to remember back in 2018, he had an immunity deal, which seems to me like that could have been on purpose to keep him from talking. So that's likely why those charges weren't brought, but they could bring, they did get a plea deal with him about other stuff. He went to Rikers for 100 days. And then, of course, they were able to bring the perjury charges against him, but they aren't going to be allowed to tell the jury that. So it kind of boils down to whether the jury believes Michael Cohen or not. And the judge won't allow the prosecution, like I said, to tell the jury Weisselberg isn't there because he's in prison for lying. So they can't discredit him that way. Unless, of course, the judge hasn't decided on that yet. He may decide that the prosecution can do that, but I think that would be hugely prejudicial, which could open Judge Merchan up to any conviction being thrown out on appeal. But, I think this whole Weisselberg thing could be a problem, right? Because it was Weisselberg who falsified the business records. They need to have proof that he did it at the direction and for the benefit of Donald Trump. Cohen testifies to that. And Cohen said that, he was in the room where it happened, and so was Weisselberg. But Weisselberg's not there to talk about it. A lot of political pundits, though, are saying that the jury likely doesn't even know who Weisselberg is, let alone why he's in prison. But I disagree, Pete. One of those jurors follows Michael Cohen and me on Twitter, so I think he might know who Weisselberg is and that he's in prison. But the jury also has to believe Cohen when he says Trump told him he would pay him back the hush money and have Weisselberg handle it. What we didn't see, again, that, like I said, that I'm worried about is that Trump had any direct knowledge of how Weisselberg reimbursed Cohen. But that's not even Trump's defense, which is bananas. And it's because they have an impossible client. Their defense is that the affair never happened. And it has to be impossible to argue that Trump knew about the affair and the payment, but didn't have anything to do with how Weisselberg set up the payment, or that Weisselberg falsified the documents without Trump's knowledge, if you're contending that the affair never happened at all. It seems to perpetuate the cover-up of now Trump candidate, not just then Trump candidate. But the prosecution, Hoffinger for the DA, I think did a really good job of telling Michael Cohen's story, walking Cohen through the Stormy Daniels incident, and then punctuating that timeline with call records back and forth between Hope Hicks, Trump, Schiller, Stormy's lawyer, the guys at the Inquirer. Schiller is Trump's body man. You would have to sometimes call him to get Trump on the phone. There was even a text message from Melania to Michael Cohen telling Michael Cohen to call Donald Trump. And so I thought that they did a great job of walking him through that. But for the presentation of the case, like on the whole, they brought in all of these witnesses up until this point have basically been corroborating what Michael Cohen testified to under direct to really bolster his credibility. Because, as I said, it's going to boil down to whether or not you believe Michael Cohen and what he said Weisselberg did on behalf of Trump.
Yeah, and I think it's, would it be better to have Weisselberg there testifying? Sure. Would he testify? I don't know. We don't know. He could take the fifth. I think at the end of the day, people certainly know enough about Michael Cohen. And it's not, he's not pretending that he didn't, once work for Trump. He had a tough time on cross today, sort of admitting to having lied. It was clear that it was something he didn't like to say, that, well, that wasn't the truth. Oh, so it was a lie? Well, it wasn't the truth. And finally, after a lot of back and forth, he said, okay, yeah, it was a lie. So again, this isn't, as a prosecutor, you don't pick the witness, right? The witnesses are who they are. And people like Trump don't tend to hang out with a bunch of choir boys and choir girls who are, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. So you're going to have people who hem and haw, but I think in general, as long as Cohen keeps his cool and doesn't let them, Todd Blanche or anybody else get under his skin, I think it seemed like, at least from the people in the courtroom, that he was credible. And if that's the case, I think it's okay that they don't have Weisselberg testifying. I don't know what your thoughts are. If you seem a little more wish they had him up there.
No, I think Cohen did a great job. Actually, I talked to Ben Wittes from Lawfare. I was sitting with the folks from Lawfare in the courtroom, and at the end of the day, Ben Wittes looked at me and said, "If the jury believes Michael Cohen, then this is a slam dunk for the prosecution." And that's, like I said, what it's going to boil down to. And he's holding his own. We'll talk about the cross a little bit later in the show. I don't think Blanche is doing a very good job. I don't know that it was necessarily, an intense afternoon of cross-examination or anything. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But on Monday, there were a lot of, I think, kind of important points that came up, and I wrote them all down. And I was hoping you could go over some of those
for sure
standout moments.
And what's interesting, and we can scope back and go to the 35,000 foot level a little bit later. But this is a compact case, right? I mean, they're finishing up cross, and again, we'll talk about that later. But the prosecution will likely be done because they said Cohen's the last witness. And when you get it all down, a lot of things came out. That one, we learned that once Trump announced his run for the White House, Trump told Cohen to be prepared for women, plural, coming forward with quote unquote what he called stories, which to the surprise of absolutely no one, right? But Cohen also described the meeting at Trump Tower where he, Pecker, and Trump solidified the scheme to alter the outcome of the 2016 election by running positive stories about Trump and negative stories about all of his opponents. And that was corroborated by Pecker's testimony. And all the corroboration, like you said earlier, these are various people. And again, it's all the people who work for Trump. These weren't outsiders. These weren't opponents. Each and all of these witnesses have been people who, in some way, shape, or form, the big ones, were working for Trump. Obviously not Stormy Daniels, but the point being that, one, they are introducing things from people who were allies or at one time were allies of Trump, and they're corroborating the stuff so they don't have to rely just on Cohen. But I think the jury's going to believe Cohen. It helps that Pecker is corroborating it and that others are as well. Now, Cohen testified about hearing Trump say multiple times that he'd, quote unquote, take care of it, meaning that he would pay for the stories he wanted to quash. Everyone understood that Trump would pay. And that makes me think, Cohen has said repeatedly, like, Trump's like a mob boss. He doesn't, don't write what you can say and don't say what you can achieve with just nodding your head. And that's the way Trump would communicate. Melania came up a couple of times. First time was when we learned the locker room talk, that phrase was her idea for responding to the Access Hollywood tape. And she was also part of one of the most important pieces of testimony from Monday. Around the time of the Stormy Daniels saga, Trump told Cohen to delay paying Stormy until after the election, telling Cohen, quote, "If I win it, it won't have any relevance. If I lose, I won't really care." And so then Cohen asked Trump, "Well, how are things upstairs?" Meaning with Melania. Cohen said Trump wasn't worried about her, saying, quote, "How long do you think I'd be on the market? Not long." Such a charming man, essentially. And, what I took that to be is, and I think the common understanding of that is like, well, if she leaves me, I'm such a, great commodity and all the women want to marry me that I could get remarried again in a heartbeat.
Well, didn't he bring that up again with the Ben Roethlisberger thing, where he made him say like that? I think it was during Stormy's testimony, maybe, that Ben Roth, of all, like even Big Ben was there, but everybody likes Trump. Stormy likes Trump better than Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, it's just pathetic. I think Nicholas brought that up, like probably because Trump made her. It's just stupid. Oh, he did a great job at that golf tournament too, right? Like just the most egotistical, weird shit that I've seen in a really long time. Unbelievable, but totally believable.
Yeah, and that's what's going to kill, this trial and any others, just the need, his insistence, I'm sure, his being Trump's insistence that his attorneys ask about things or try and say things that are entirely playing to his narcissistic impulses and are not good, sound legal maneuvers, but simply things that he has to hear because he has to be the best and everybody has to be big and strong with tears in their eyes and all that other crap that, we've heard him for the past 8 years. And then finally, we learned why Cohen used his home equity line to pay Stormy Daniels. It was because he was trying to hide it from his wife. He said that he felt he could use the HELOC, get repaid by Trump, and Cohen's wife would be none the wiser. That corroborates Cohen's testimony that he expected to be paid back. This was clearly something that, again, I think Cohen is believable because, in large measure, he is telling a coherent story that all makes logical sense. And when you look at somebody's motivation and what they would expect or what they would insist on have happening, it all makes sense. It's coherent. And you've got all these other people corroborating it. So I think Cohen's a credible witness. Yes, he's a convicted liar, but I think in this case, the things he's had to say, if I'm on the jury, and by all accounts, as he was testifying, people were saying the jurors were sitting there, kind of taking a lot of notes as he went through a lot of detail. So I think for the prosecution, I think he's been a good witness. We'll see what comes up in the last, his last day across.
Yeah. People love a comeback story. People love a redemption story. So, I mean, we learned, we'll talk about this later, that his book made $3.4 million. Both of his books did. So people are into it. But I thought that was interesting about the HELOC too. Like at first I was like, why does your wife not know about the HELOC? Well, she did, but apparently they're on paperless billing. So no bills would come to the house. So she would see if $130,000 was missing from a bank account, but not on a home equity line of credit. And so honestly, it's funny. There's some humor there. But it really does show that Cohen intended to be paid back. And of course, we talked about Hope Hicks' testimony, where she said that Cohen isn't the kind of guy who would just pay that out of the kindness of his heart. That's not who he is. And I think that the prosecution did a really good job of laying that out. All right, we have more to get to, but we have to take a quick break. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Think about this. How would you feel if someone recorded every single thing you did online, every minute of every day? Pretty invasive, right? Well, that's essentially what's happening whenever you're online. Internet providers like AT&T or Verizon can keep logs of every website you visit, and they can legally sell this information to the highest bidder. My privacy is important, and that's the main reason I always use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN enhances your online privacy by routing your internet connection through their secure servers, ensuring your internet provider cannot track or log your activity. Now, you might be wondering if using a VPN means that the VPN provider can see and log your data. This is a valid concern, as some VPNs, despite claiming a no logs policy, have been found logging user data. However, ExpressVPN stands out as the most trustworthy option in my experience because of their pioneering trusted server technology. ExpressVPN was the first major provider to operate all VPN servers solely on RAM, which means they're physically unable to store any data, including logs of user activity. This commitment to privacy is verified by one of the largest assurance firms, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, which audited their technology to validate their no logs claim. This level of transparency and security is why top tech critics like CNET and The Verge consistently rank ExpressVPN as the world's #1 VPN. So stop letting people keep logs of what you do online. Visit expressvpn.com/cleanup right now and find out how you can get 3 months free. That's expressvpn.com/cleanup. expressvpn.com/cleanup to learn more.
Hey, welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank. Richard A. Dania, Anthony Heath, Jody Darling, Nancy Martin, Wendy Whitney, Gene Langdon, and he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Thank all of you so much for your support. As Allison said, you all are the key to this program, putting it together, getting it out. So thank each and every one of you for your support, because we can do things like talk about this trial and go to the trial. But let's, having covered Monday, let's go on to Tuesday. And we just learned that Cohen will be the defense's or the prosecution's final witness. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Trump's entourage, which today, Tuesday, as we're taping, included Doug Burgum, which if you're saying who is Doug Burgum, you're not alone. He is the governor of North Dakota, a Trump sycophant, and apparently in the running with all these other knuckleheads that you're about to hear as Trump's potential vice presidential candidate. Joining Burgum was Mike Johnson, Vivek Ramaswamy, who apparently has nothing else to do with his time, and Byron Donalds, to name a few. And all of these folks are getting up in front of the cameras, in front of the media scrums, repeating the exact things that Trump got held into contempt for. Now, Kyle Cheney writes in Politico, many of Donald Trump's surrogates who have joined him at the hush money trial have conspicuously mounted verbal attacks on Justice Juan Merchan's adult daughter, who works for a firm that does some political work for Democrats. House Speaker Mike Johnson became the latest today. So among the atrocities here, the judge's own daughter is making millions of dollars doing online fundraising for Democrats, Johnson said, conflating, of course, Merchan's daughter's purported fundraising efforts with her own salary. Be that as it may. Quote, they're using this trial as a hook, so it's so corrupt, which again, Mike Johnson, second in line for the presidency, right after the vice president, apparently a God-fearing man, but not so God-fearing that he isn't willing to go up to New York and take up the mantle of the defense of a man who is, getting some details said about the $140,000 he used to pay off a porn star for a one night or 5-minute stand. It's just so. I'm curious. One, who's coordinating this? It seems it's not
Donald Trump. Donald Trump is coordinating it, Pete.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
and adult film actor Stormy Daniels, I thought did an incredible job on the stand, and we'll talk about her in a bit and her story. But yeah, it's really weird to see Mike Johnson there in support of him as a criminal defendant for this particular story. And I just watched an interview that Caitlin Collins did with Doug Burgum, where he repeated the garbage about the judge's daughter word for word. Right? It's a coordinated message. And Caitlin outright asked him if Trump told him and the others to say that. And Burgum said, it was almost like, remember when Manafort was like, that's what we said. That's what he said. That's what our position is. Yeah. It was kind of like that. He was like, well, that's absolutely not at all. I mean, it was a weird sentence. He denied it. And then he spun right around and started talking about Biden's inflation problems and the border. Like, it was just so rehearsed. But, because directing others to say things, so he denied it because if Trump directed him to say it, that's a violation of the contempt or the gag order. So Trump just has his lapdogs repeating what he's not allowed to say. And it would be really hard to prove that Trump directed them to do so. I mean, it would be really hard to prove that. Though Judge Engoron did this, right? Just like Judge Engoron, Merchan could call Trump to the stand and ask him under oath whether he directed these people to attack his daughter. Because Engoron did that regarding Trump's attacks on his law clerk, remember? And Trump denied it on the stand under oath, and Engoron found him to not be credible and held him in contempt. So maybe we could see the same thing here, now that the prosecution's almost done with their case in chief. Also, we just learned that the appeals court denied Trump's appeal of his gag order. Remember, he was appealing that in the background while the trial went. He wanted to stop the trial during the pendency of the appeal, but they were like, no, we're going to go on with the trial. So that's been lingering in the background, and the appellate court just came back and denied him that. So the gag order still stands. So it'll be interesting to see, with the rapid pace this case is going, whether the prosecution, they're going to weigh the disruption of the trial with a show cause hearing, or a hearing to see if Trump is directing these people to continue to attack Judge Merchan's daughter, and how Judge Merchan will respond to that. It's going to be interesting to see if it comes up.
Yeah, and I mean, part of what I think makes it a little more complicated is that they are congressmen. I don't think there've been any congresswomen, but they're certainly not, whether or not they're covered by speech and debate, they're not in the House. But I think it adds a level of complexity for the judge. And given the timing, I mean, we're at, Cohen's the last witness for the prosecution. So I would, based on what I've heard, I don't know that the prosecution would say, okay, we want to, throw everything to a halt based on what's been said so far. But it clearly is sleazy. Lena Haba's out there doing the same thing. I mean, it's in all of it, Allison, all of it. There were literal fundraising emails and texts that came out from Trump, that came out from Mike Johnson, that came out from all these other folks, or not all, but many of the other folks who are talking to the press. It's all about the grift. It is all about raising money. So some of it's, flooding the zone with shit, in Steve Bannon's words. The other part of it is, trying to make a buck, squeeze another dollar out of the donor by getting up there and making these statements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Lena Haba was passing notes in the courtroom today. She got in trouble for doing that, for getting a note up to Trump's lawyers when they were asking some questions about Cohen's, previous lies or something. I'll have to look to see. Jose Pagliari has it written out pretty well. But, they did bring up a good point. The pundits that were discussing this, like Laura Coates and Paula Reed, were saying, hey, we have to remember that there are jury consultants. And if asking a specific question elicits a certain look or response, like a physical response from a juror, then you want to take note of that, so that as the defense, you can elicit that feeling again by talking about the same thing again, kind of hammer on that point, because all you need is the one juror, right, to hang the jury. We're not going to get an acquittal here, but all you need is one juror to hang the jury. But the rest of Cohen's testimony on Tuesday covered the raid on his home, the illegally executed search warrant in April of 2018. His home and office were searched, and they seized a bunch of stuff. Talked about the Trump pressure campaign to keep Cohen in the fold. And a lot of that had to do with Robert Costello, who's been a lawyer for Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. And at the time, in 2018, you probably will remember, if you listen to the Mueller, She Wrote podcast, Costello was reaching out on behalf of Trump saying, sleep well, you have friends in high places. Let me be your attorney. Stay in the fold. We know you're loyal. For months, this went on, this pressure campaign. Robert Mueller wrote about it in his report. I'm quoting now directly from the Mueller report, page 6, volume 2, in the obstruction volume. After the FBI searched Cohen's home in April of 2018, the president publicly asserted Cohen would not flip, contacted him directly to tell him to stay strong, and then privately passed messages of support to him. That was through Costello. Cohen also discussed pardons with the president's personal counsel and believed that if he stayed on message, he would be taken care of. But after Cohen began cooperating with the government in the summer of 2018, the president publicly criticized him, called him a rat, and suggested that his family members had committed crimes. And a lot of that has to do with Robert Mueller showing a pattern of behavior, of dangling pardons, of trying to prevent people from flipping, all relevant to the obstruction of justice investigation that Mueller was doing. So I thought that was very interesting. I had flashbacks to the kitchen table days.
Interesting and depressing, right? Because I know you were having flashbacks, but I think for so many people, members of the media included, shocked and surprised that this information is coming up. And it's like, it is clear to me that you never read the Mueller report, because a lot of this, as you said, a lot of this was developed by and then published by Mueller in his report. And it, again, going back to Bill Barr spinning everybody in terms of what the report didn't say, a lot of the stuff that people are saying, oh my God, is been there for, years now. But I'm glad people are paying attention to it. Our listeners know.
Our listeners know. This was not a surprise and a shock to our listeners that the actual catch and kill was Bill Barr grabbing onto this investigation, halting it in New York, telling the Manhattan DA not to do anything, giving Weisselberg immunity, and shutting the whole thing down. That's the real catch and kill story.
Then writing a memo saying that Trump couldn't, for the obstruction counts, that it couldn't be charged in a way that, poisoned that forever.
He actually made a prosecutorial call and wrote it down, saying that they were declining and would decline to prosecute Donald Trump for obstruction of justice, even if he weren't the president. And that was Trump's golden ticket. That's why Merrick Garland, much to my chagrin and much to the chagrin of many people, didn't immediately charge Donald Trump with the obstruction counts in the Mueller report. It's because he had a golden ticket. He had a get out of jail free card written by Bill Barr using prosecutorial discretion, which is impossible to overcome. And had charges been brought 100 times out of 100, they would be dismissed if you've got a letter from the Attorney General saying that they declined to prosecute obstruction of justice. So that's where we are with that. But it was a big trip down memory lane. And then they did the redemption arc of Michael Cohen, including the moment he flipped on Trump, right? And so they talk about that, which is, again, something that Mueller brought up in his report about this obstruction. But it's fascinating to me that obstructive behavior is on trial now. And I mean, he's not charged with obstruction, obviously, but that it's part of the testimony in this trial. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And so, of course, now the defense's job is to try and break down that redemption arc to paint Cohen as non-repentant or continual liar and
biased, try and hot hatred for Trump. And
and I, at least today, reading what's going on, I'm not sure how well the defense is doing. I mean, the first thing that Blanche brought up was Cohen's TikTok from a couple of weeks ago. And Blanche asked, quote, "Did you call me a crying little shit?" And of course, that was immediately objected to and sustained.
Yeah. I'm sure Blanche knew there would be a sustained objection, but went for it anyhow, right? Just to get it, because you can't unring the bell, right? The jury's heard it, even though you can instruct him not to take it into account. It's still there.
Right. And, and he continued saying, okay, did you call Trump a dictator douchebag? And, so this is all right. This is the defense is trying to show Cohen isn't credible, not because necessarily he's a liar, but just, in this case, showing that he has such an intense bias, has such an intense hatred of Trump that he isn't credible. So it's a little bit of a different angle. But again, I don't know. I think that is certainly what they were trying to do. I don't know that they did a very effective job of it. Now, they've got another day, right? So, we'll see what happens on Thursday.
Yeah, well, they're trying to take the fact that Cohen's been indicted for lying and that he's a liar. And even to his own admission, he lied for Donald Trump and he bullied for Donald Trump. So they're trying to take the fact that he's a known liar, couple that with the fact that he hates Donald Trump, and they're going to put it together mush it together into a smash burger that says, you are lying when you said that Trump was there in the room when Weisselberg approved your $420,000 payback for the hush money, and that Stormy Daniels is lying about the affair, and that's just kind of to prove that she's a liar. They tried to do that. We'll talk about her testimony in a little bit, but Blanche kept at it. He kept trying to show communications between the DA and Michael Cohen, where prosecutors asked Cohen to stop talking about the case in March of 2023. Cohen's like, can't recall. And he's like, let me refresh your memory. Okay, so did you lie? No, I wouldn't say I lied. Maybe it wasn't accurate. Did you lie? And it just goes back and forth like that with semantics. And these lines of questions were repeatedly objected to, and many of them were sustained. But again, like I said, the jury can't unhear those. Tyler McBrien from Lawfare reported that Cohen actually started to sound a little bit annoyed, but so did Blanche. I think Cohen was getting under Blanche's skin maybe just as much. Blanche asked about all the times that Michael Cohen spoke to the press and his 200 podcast episodes and his books and all the times that he went on TV when he shouldn't have. And again, Cohen said he couldn't recall. Then Blanche asked, how can you recall phone calls with Donald Trump from 2016, but you can't remember promising you'd stop going on TV in 2023? So I think that was probably, in my opinion, so far with all the transcripts that I've read, I'm not in the courtroom today, that might have been the one win for Blanche. And I think he knows that, and I think he kind of kept hammering on that. How can you not recall all of these things, but you can recall with great detail that, you called Donald Trump? But now, let's be frank. When they were walking Cohen on direct through all the phone calls to Trump and Hope Hicks and Keith Davidson and Stormy Daniels's attorney, and her agent, Keith Davidson was her attorney, and all of the phone calls to Trump and Melania texting to call Trump, they have all the call records and text messages up right there for him to refresh his memory. And that's why Cohen said to Blanche, if you would like to put these up in front of me on the screen to refresh my memory, I'll be happy to answer it. But off the top of my head, I can't recall. So that ended up, I think, being kind of a win for Cohen. So, I don't know. What do you think about Cohen continuing to talk publicly about the trial? Because Randall Eliason made a great point on Twitter. He said, this is an odd line of questioning if you're trying to prove Cohen was in bed with the DA to help get Trump indicted. He wasn't listening to the DA. He was ignoring their warnings. And he was going out on TV and doing his TikToks and talking about, I think we might see this on Redirect. They might be like, yeah, you weren't listening to the DA, so you weren't in cahoots with them to try to make sure that Donald Trump goes to prison for life or whatever, he wants to prove.
I agree. I don't know why they went into such detail about all. If you're trying to demonstrate, again, it is a reasonable line of attack to sit there and say you hate this man so passionately. You have such extraordinary feelings against him. You so very much want to see him in jail. You've, talked about and sold T-shirts with, calling for him to go to prison or wanting him in a cage and saying things like that. That is a reasonable line of attack. But if you do start lining it up with, well, didn't the prosecution tell you not to do it? I agree with Eliason that absolutely clearly demonstrates that you're not like the stooge being controlled by the prosecutors. You're doing your own thing. Again, does it, at the end of the day, do I think this is going to cause the jury to say, I don't find him credible? I don't think so. I think the jury is going to listen to him, listen to all the things that he did for Trump. And he had a really interesting comment about they're asking him, didn't you think all these great things about Trump? Weren't you saying all these wonderful things about him? He said, yeah, but at the time I was like knee deep in the cult of Trump. And that's the kind of thing that I think people understand when they sit there and they watch what goes on. They see, well, presumably they're not hopefully watching television, but they see these parade of congressmen, coming up to kiss the ring. It is clear that this is something that happens. And so for somebody to sit there and say, yeah, I believed that once upon a time, but I don't believe that anymore. And yes, I think justice should be done. To me, it would be appropriate Cohen said, because he was asked by Blanche, well, do you think he should be in jail? And he said, well, that's up to the court and the jury, and then they kind of went round and round some. But I didn't get the sense listening to the testimony today that there was a lot of headway made by the defense in trying to knock down Cohen. Again, we got another day, right? We'll have a full, at the end of court today, the judge asked the defense how much longer. Again, no pressure, no rush. I'm just trying to estimate how much do you think you'll need time-wise. And they said, well, probably till the end of the day, Thursday. So it sounds like another full day.
And we don't have court on Friday because, of course, Donald Trump is going to attend the graduation of his son, who had just been born when he was raw dogging the adult film star. Anyhow, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about I think in totality, all of the objections and sustained objections really didn't they prevented Blanche, Trump's lawyer, from getting into a rhythm, right? And this is coming from the reporters inside the courtroom, my pals in there. They're like, it's kind of a snooze fest after the, coming out striking big with the, did you call me a lying little shit or whatever? And did you lie? Or, and then afterwards, it got really boring, according to everybody in the pool. And had I been in the courtroom, I think I might have, been able to tell that by the loudness of the clickety clack on the keyboards. But he was jumping around a lot. Blanche was jumping around a lot, which comes off as somewhat confusing. But Blanche does ask him if he lied to the Mueller investigators. Again, to me, this just shows what Cohen already testified to, that he lied for Donald Trump, right? Tyler McBrien, who I follow his Twitter feed along with Anna Bauer from Lawfare, said after the first hour and 15 minutes of Cross, most of it boring and seemingly aimless, we haven't spoken about payments or business records one single time. And another reporter quipped, way to make it boring at the first break during Cross.
Yeah, and after that break, they then went to Cohen's meeting with the district attorney when Cohen was in prison and all the benefits that he'd get if he cooperated. But, this it's typical at trial to try and impeach a cooperating witness by sort of insinuating that you're only cooperating to get special treatment. But then Blanche asked about how long Cohen thought it would take for the DA to bring charges, or whether it mattered to him, and Cohen seemed confused. And, even a reporter noted, quote, join the club. It wasn't, you're right that I think exactly the point that Blanche didn't ever seem to get into a rhythm. And it was the kind of thing when you're bouncing around, you may do that at points to get elements of information or items of evidence into the record, but hopefully you've got a sort of narrative flow. And if reporters are saying this, I guarantee you the jury is feeling the same way. And again, it's not every defense, every person who is going up against a cooperating witness is going to try and point out that they're getting something from it. But I don't think, again, to the point of ultimately whether or not Cohen is credible to the jury, the fact that he, got time off or a reduction because of his cooperation, I don't think that's going to significantly adversely. I mean, who knows? We don't know. We're all speculating what the jury is thinking, but I don't know that this fatally undercuts what Cohen has to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think I've assigned the movie for everybody to watch previously on this program. I think I should go watch My Blue Heaven, because that's exactly what happens in the courtroom there. They're like, don't you get a paycheck from the government and a nice house in the suburbs? And Steve Martin's like, that's not all I get. And he's like, oh, what else is the government giving you for your cooperation? And he just flips the script and says, I get to never see my mother again. I get to live in a place, don't get me wrong, it's a nice neighborhood, but for someone who grew up on the streets of the city that never sleeps, it's hell on earth. I mean, it's just hilarious. And it's funny to me that every single time we go through these criminal trials, they'll try to impeach a cooperating witness by saying, you're a criminal. But that's what cooperating witnesses are. And so, but they have to do it each time because the jury is new to this, right? Probably. Who knows? But anyway, let's talk I was kind of, you talked about the jumping around and it's kind of confusing. I felt like if I were the defense here, I think it would have been more effective to start with a stinger, right? But then to go through this chronologically, just from the opposite point of view rather than the redemption arc, just go through all the times he lied to Congress, what he lied to Congress about, why he lied to Congress. Well, I actually probably wouldn't ask that if I were the defense, because the answer is to protect Donald Trump. But just to go through all the times that he's lied, gone to prison, perjured himself. Why did you call your book Revenge if you're so sad about what you did? My answer to that would be like, well, that's why I call my podcast Mea Culpa. But, and something else we learned today, Mea Culpa is because he felt like he did a bad thing, but also they're his initials, MC, Michael Cohen. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the two names they used with the Stormy Daniels. One was like the plaintiff that had the PP alliteration, the defendant
Peggy Peterson and David Dennison.
Dennison, right, for DD. There's a lot of crazy alliteration, but
he was jumping all over the place. Mueller investigation, then we would go forward to the DA's case, then back to congressional testimony. It was confusing. It seemed disjointed. All the sustained objections disrupted the flow. I'm not a fan. I give it a 2. But at one point, Blanche read some of Cohen's greatest hits, calling Trump a Cheeto-dusted cartoon villain and a boorish misogynist. And so, and then he quoted him directly one time. Another time he said from his book, "I truly fucking hope this man ends up in prison," which Cohen admits that sounds like something I would say. And he also quoted him from his podcast. And then just like with Stormy Daniels, asked if he was motivated by fame and money, saying, "You're selling merch, you're wearing the shirt with Donald in prison and handcuffs, you've got a mug." And he's like, "Yeah, that's how I make money." So I thought all of that was kind of just reminiscent of the way that they treated Stormy, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah. And then finally, of course, Blanche brings up Pomerantz, and this is probably Trump telling him, "You've got to bring this up." And he brings it up trying to draw the implication that the feds were in on this. And, that was objected to and ultimately was shut down. But again, I don't think having Donald Trump as your client, particularly if you're a criminal defense attorney, that has got to be an absolutely miserable experience, because I'm willing to bet, one, there's a whole swath of very competent attorneys who want nothing to do with Trump. I do think Emile Beauvais and Blanche and Nicholas are good defense attorneys. These aren't Alina Habba. They do know their way around the courtroom. I agree with you. I don't think Blanche's cross-examination of Cohen was particularly good, but I think in general, their defense of Trump has been pretty good. And I can't help but wonder how much better it might have been if you didn't have, the little scribbled Sharpie notes that when he's awake, Trump is sliding over to him. Apparently, Nicholas, I was reading somewhere in somebody's Twitter feed that apparently he was fast asleep today, and she had to kind of like scooch over and like nudge him to wake him up at some point. But
yeah, when I was there, a cop had to go by and brush him on the shoulder to wake him up. He's full on falling asleep. And again, he has a little routine, and he thinks that he's tricking us. He honestly thinks that we don't know he's sleeping. It's funny. Again, wrote about it in my Substack. Check it out. Everybody, we have to take a quick break. We're going to come right back, and we're going to talk about Stormy Daniels' testimony and a couple of other things that we need to update you on, including Pete Navarro and Rudy Giuliani and all sorts of other cool Bannon stuff. So stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank. Thanks to you, we get to travel to New York and get into court and report to you what's happening from the inside. Thank you, Liz B., Terry Davis, Peter Castor, Arlene Clunas, Peggy Perkins, and Patricia Stout. All right, Pete, let's talk about Stormy Daniels' testimony last week. Pete, I thought she did a really good job, both on direct and on cross-examination. Now, on direct, she told the story of the encounter, and to me, and a lot of other people, it sounded like it was non-consensual. And that actually caused the defense to change their tactic and hammer on that point, which I think was a mistake, a really big mistake, because they may have had a reasonable appeal for prejudicial testimony, but because they kept bringing it up again, that sort of takes that away from them, right?
Yeah, it does. And I think, not that the jurors know this, but all of our listeners do, that given Trump's prior convictions, particularly with regard and the things that have come up in those trials with E. Jean Carroll and others, credibly accused of sexual assault, is surprising absolutely no one that, A, not only was Stormy Daniels a very credible witness, I agree with you, but two, the story she was telling is exactly the story that we have heard from woman after woman after woman when it comes to Donald Trump. And I think what is really important for the prosecution is the fact that Stormy's story didn't become valuable until after the Access Hollywood tape came out. And that's when her agent and the lawyers, including Cohen, really started scrambling to buy the story. Now, the fact that Trump would pay $130,000 for a story, but only $30,000 for the Dorman story, seems to me to show that her story was more valuable because it was true. But the timing of the Access Hollywood tape was really, really important. And the evidence showed that Team Trump was scrambling to catch and kill her story, Stormy's story, in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape. And that also, part of the reason you bring in Hope Hicks, was that her testimony last week corroborated that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And on cross, with Stormy, the best Trump's lawyers could come up with was to try to discredit her with small details, small differences in the story she told In Touch magazine in 2011 and the story that she told in 2018. But the story for In Touch magazine was just missing details. And that's because it was edited. It even, on redirect, the prosecution even brought up the story where it says at the bottom, this story has been lightly edited. So they took out details that weren't in the other one. That was really all they had on her cross examination. But what stood out to me on her cross was that she is funny. She is quick. She's quick-witted and she's funny. So here's just three of my favorite examples. When she was asked if she celebrated when Donald Trump was indicted, she quipped, "Which time?" And then when asked if she sold merch when Trump was indicted, she said she did, just like Trump did. And then when they asked her about her job, they got her in like, "Oh, do you direct adult films? Do you direct pornographic films?" Yes. Okay. And they established that she directed adult films. And then Nicholas said, "Don't you just make up stories about sex for a living? So didn't you just make up your story about having sex with Donald Trump?" And she said, "No, if I had written that story, I would have made it better." I was like, damn, she's fierce and quick. And she was calm as a cucumber. I think the jury probably found her very believable.
Yeah, I agree. And, a couple of things. When she first started, when the witness on the prosecution side, I think the Judge Merchan cautioned her because she was giving some answers that were included a lot of detail, including detail that wasn't being asked in the question. And I think to her credit, she kind of took that in, adjusted on the fly. And by the time, like on cross, she was tight. The things she had to say, she was using, and you want to walk a fine line, right? You want to answer the question. You don't want to appear to be cute. You don't want to be, appearing to entertain the jury. But if you can work in a little bit of humor here and there, like she did, I think she kind of threaded that needle of being humorous and effective and believable. Kind of the scary things I saw today. She wore into and out of the courtroom. She wore a bulletproof vest. And I had not seen that until some people were reporting on like her, photos of her going into and out of the courtroom during testimony. And again, it's like we are at the trial of a mob boss or a drug kingpin, when you have witnesses who are wearing, bulletproof vests between their car and the courtroom. It's just crazy.
Wow.
But, but that's where we're at. And God knows what Fulton County is going to look like if and when we ever get there. But going back to last week, at the end of the day on Thursday, Judge Merchan denied Trump's motion to modify the gag order so that he could publicly respond to Stormy's testimony. And he also denied Trump's motion for a mistrial, saying, look, that the motion was, well, her testimony was prejudicial to Trump. And Merchan said, look, you didn't object as the testimony was happening. And at one point, even Judge Merchan, I objected on your behalf one time. And so, and he said, I was surprised. We're talking about, the condom came up. There was no objection and the lack of the condom. And he's like, essentially, the burden is in your court to raise these objections, and you didn't. So no, I'm not going to sustain, this motion for a mistrial. And then when the defense changed up their plan for cross-examination, they kept up bringing the exact same things that they said or saying led to a mistrial. And because Blanche denied the sexual encounter ever took place to begin with in his opening statement, well, that opened the door for the DA to ask details about the fact that it had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that and that's, what we were just talking about a little bit earlier in the show was, you can't bring up all of the things that you think are prejudicial over and over and over again in your cross-examination and expect to get a mistrial out of it. It doesn't make any sense. And he actually, I think it was the condom remark that the judge himself, like sua sponte, objected to on behalf of the defense because they just sat there and let it happen. But then on Friday, Trump, you talked about Pomerantz a minute ago, right? He was the guy who went to help Cy Vance get a conviction or get an indictment there. And in his book, he called Cy Vance a chicken for not indicting Donald Trump. But Trump subpoenaed Pomerantz because, he's got this whole thing that the feds are in on it. But this is his way of saying that Biden's DOJ is running this state court, criminal trial through Pomerantz because he used to work for the feds, right? So he wanted to subpoena Pomerantz, and Merchan on Friday denied that subpoena. So that's not going anywhere. And then there were a few more document witnesses. Westerhout came up and testified. That didn't end well for the defense either, because Westerhout said something like, I think Nicholas asked Westerhout, like, was Trump worried about his family? And she said, oh, I could tell he was really sad. And I felt like he was worried about his family, but he never said that, but I could just tell. And then that was objected to and sustained. And that's kind of how their cross of Westerhout ended. It was not good. And then on redirect, the state gets up and says, hey, when was the last time you met with Trump attorney Susan Nicholas? And she was like, 2 days ago. And she said nothing further, kind of insinuating that you guys came up with that answer, didn't you? So that didn't go well, but that's kind of what happened on Friday. The trial was adjourned early on Friday. So that was kind of the end of the day. Right before they left, they had that discussion about Weisselberg that we talked about earlier. And there still hasn't been a ruling on that, on how they're going to deal with Weisselberg. But as you said, we learned today that Michael Cohen is the final witness for the prosecution. So once this cross is done, and seemingly should be done by Thursday at 4 p.m., no trial on Friday, then we come back Monday and start with the case, the defense to put their case on. And by the way, today there was also a question. The judge asked Todd Blanche, if Trump, do you know yet whether or not Trump is going to testify? No. So he's not going to testify, or you don't yet know if he's going to testify? We don't yet know if he's going to testify.
No way on earth he's going to testify. I'm curious if they get if the prosecution wants any redirect for Cohen. So that'll be interesting, right? Because if their intention is to go on the defense and take Cohen till the end of the day on Thursday, if they do want to go to redirect, they've got a long weekend essentially to prepare for it. But you're right. Then we get into the defense witnesses. I think they wanted to bring. There's some question about an expert, so we'll see what kind of I am sure there will be witnesses, if only to stroke Trump's ego, to say things that will promptly get objected to and shut down. But I think you're right,
though. I think that the state will want to redirect, and that's probably what we'll see Monday: a redirect and a rebut, probably, and then maybe Tuesday they start their case. But either way, I don't think it's going to finish. I don't think the jury will get this case probably before Memorial Day. Maybe we'll see, but we'll keep you posted. All right, we've got a couple more updates for you, but we'll take one last quick break. Everybody, stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. Our last batch of new patrons to thank includes Christine Celio, Timothy Molinari, B. Fabs, Alisi, Chip Roy's Chin Merkin. What did Sue A. Sponte know, and when did she know it? Sue Sponte, very, very clever. Thank all of you. You're amazing. Could not do this without you, and we greatly, greatly appreciate your support. So, Allison, there's news on the Steve Bannon front, right?
Oh, yeah. Steve Bannon lost his appeal that's been going on for 2 years now, just so you know. 2-year appeal. Judge Nichols let him out pending his appeal. He didn't have to serve his prison sentence, unlike our good friend Pete Navarro, who's enjoying his commissary days down in lovely Florida. But he lost his appeal. They say, no, you have to report to prison. And now that his appeal has been denied, DOJ filed a motion with the court that's for Steve Bannon to turn himself in to begin serving his prison sentence. And I think Judge Nichols is giving him till Friday or something to probably appeal en banc. I'm assuming that's what he's going to do if he's got a lawyer that's willing to do it for him, because he owes his lawyers millions and millions of dollars. So I don't know. We'll see. He is not. Rudy can't practice law, so Rudy can't file it for him. Eastman can't practice law, so Eastman can't file it for him. So I don't know who's going to get to file this en banc hearing request, but we'll see what ends up happening.
Yeah, and funny, you mentioned Pete Navarro earlier. Interestingly enough, Matt Gaetz tried to visit him down in FCI Miami and was turned down. And as a result, Jim Jordan is all in a frenzy saying, I'm going to investigate the politicization of the Bureau of Prisons. We're going to have to give up on, redirect Comer and crew to go look at the BOP now. But again, crazy publicity stunt. Pete Navarro, he is, for better or worse, at probably about a halfway, maybe not quite halfway through. It's not a long sentence. I mean, he's in jail, and jail is terrible. It's the low security institution. But it's like, dude, if you just would be quiet, you'd be out before you know it, and nobody would be the wiser. But instead, you're dead set on, a perpetual whine that never takes you out of the kind of laughing news. Maybe that's the point. I don't know. Yeah,
I talked about this on the Beans. Jim Jordan actually wants to bring in the director of the Bureau of Prisons to ask him about this menace of not letting Matt Gaetz visit Pete Navarro. Not that, they don't want to talk about horrible prison conditions for everyone. They don't want to talk about, sex abuse that happens. But of course, as I said on the Beans, Jim Jordan is good at turning a blind eye to that kind of thing. Don't want to talk about any of the other problems. Jeffrey Epstein's death, no other problems with the Bureau of Prisons. The fact that you can buy enough Oreos to put into a sock to hit somebody with, I'm kidding. But they want to question why Matt Gaetz can't visit Pete Navarro. Okay, sounds good. Also, this week, Freeman and Moss, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, they won a $148 million settlement from Rudy Giuliani, and now they filed another lawsuit asking the court to enjoin Rudy from continually defaming them. They also did this in D.C., so now they're doing it in New York. And we haven't heard about the decision on either of them, but we'll keep you posted. I hope they get that injunction, because Rudy keeps talking, going on his show. Although he was fired from WABC, they did take his show off WABC for telling election lies. I guess they were afraid of Fox had to pay $787.5 million, so they're like, maybe we shouldn't carry shows with defamation in them. So they kicked him out. But that's, I guess, they canceled. They're so mad right now because they're all just being canceled and they're running out of income streams. It's very sad. I'm super sad for all of them.
Right. And they may not be getting paid to talk, but they haven't stopped talking. This is from Raw Story. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and suspended attorney John Eastman appeared on a podcast this week. What could go wrong? And they guess what? They discussed the 2020 election.
No.
During a panel with right-wing podcast host Steve Bannon on Monday, both men suggested the 2020 election had been stolen from former President Donald Trump. Giuliani also griped about his recent firing from WABC Radio after breaking station rules about discussing the 2020 election. Eastman quickly insisted that he and Giuliani were not discussing the 2020 election with each other, despite appearing on the same podcast to talk about the 2020 election. This is Eastman's quote, I think it's important to clarify, Rudy and I are not talking about anything substantive with each other about the 2020 election, unquote, he asserted. Continuing, that would put us in trouble with a court order down in Georgia. Oh.
I'm waiting. I'm counting down the minutes for Fani Willis to file a show cause order for either revocation of bail or violating the bail conditions. That's fascinating. So we will see if it happens up in Manhattan with all of the Trump surrogates talking about the judge's daughter like they're not supposed to do, or they can, but he's not supposed to direct them to do it. And we'll see what happens down in Fulton County if they get we're on the podcast with Steve Bannon talking about the 2020 election, but I want to go on record saying we are not talking about the 2020 election. Wow. Fantastic. We'll keep you posted on all of it. We'll keep you updated on Rudy's bankruptcy hearing, which is not going well for him. Hearings, I should say. His proceeding is not going well for him. And we'll talk about all of that on the next cleanup on aisle 45, and we'll see where we are with the trial too. So again, thanks to all of our new patrons and our existing patrons and anybody who listens to this show, because just the mere act of listening really helps support us, and that support goes a long way to putting this show together. So thank you very much for all of that. If you want to become a patron, you can do that at patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. Do you have any final thoughts about Pete and the poke before we get out of here?
No, just we're halfway through. I'm halfway through the trial, right? I mean, we're at the point where we are almost, turning the corner and coming home with the defense. And I think the defense's presentation will be shorter than the prosecution. So we're not far from, potentially a verdict. Whether it makes a difference, we'll see. But lots of stuff coming up, and it just never, in thinking about Bannon, I do think he is going to get charged at some point by the feds up in New York. I don't know how with Guo and the things that he was involved with him that he does not end up getting charged there, but we'll see. I don't know how.
Well, his other trial with Judge Merchan starts in September. It was supposed to start this month, but Judge Merchan is a little busy.
Right. So much crime.
So maybe he'll get out of prison just in time for his new trial.
So much crime. So many people.
Oh no, it's already May,
crime.
June, July, August, September. But I mean, I guess it's easier to find him, to bring him in for trial if he's in prison. But he actually might, I don't know. Do you think he has a good reason to delay his prison sentence? I mean, the appellate court denied him.
No, I mean, not
because his trial's going to start in September.
He's going to, presumably try and appeal that either en banc or take it up to the Supreme Court. I can't imagine, given what they did with Navarro, that they're going to be in a much more of a position to do this anything with Bannon,
even though he's got a trial coming up in September.
Right. I would think.
All right, cool. So we'll just one of my first jobs in the Navy while I was waiting to go to nuke school was to drive prisoners back and forth from the brig. So, it's a little bit of connection, driving Bannon back and forth from prison to go to his next trial, I think would be fun for me.
Volunteer.
At least watching it. I don't want to be in the van. So no, thank you. But anyway, we're going to cover all of this in the coming weeks on Cleanup on Aisle 45. Thanks again for your support. We will see you next time. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck.
Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.